So 3.2 is super diversity mixing, fragmentation, and WE, World Englishes. So super diversity mixing, so these are some of the terms that were discussed prior to this section. So let's see what it's talked about here in the expanded version. A related issue is the challenge posed by the use of an interaction between languages of a bilingual or multilingual. So if a person knows a lot of languages, then how do the languages that he knows like Bangla, English, Hindi, Urdu, how do they interact with each other? Is interference more if one knows more than two languages, or is that not relevant? So Blomert and Rampton, among others, have remarked on the fact that multilinguals use a variety of resources at their disposal, producing highly complex blends that challenge traditional notions such as multilingualism and code switching. So here Blomert and Rampton, these two scholars, they said that actually the way that multilinguals speak with many languages in their repertoire, this requires a highly complex brain processing, so it's a very difficult process. And so it is possibly what World Englishes is touting to be the most the ideal language user, someone who can communicate with as many language users as possible, like intercultural multilingual. They refer to the work of Carol Myers-Scotton as a landmark, exposing how intrasentential code switching, so that means intrasentence, within the sentence, if I code switch, for example, I say there's been a lot of সমস্যা, or এই সমস্যাটা অনেক problematic. So here in these two sentences I used two languages, right, English and Bangla in both the sentences, and the sentence was quite had a good flow, right? It wasn't like সমস্যা there's been a lot of, but instead there's been a lot of সমস্যা. So the placement of the word সমস্যা was it replaced the word problem, right? So word order was maintained, and many other things have to be maintained for smooth intrasentential code switching. So I conducted a research, as I said, on Facebook, code switching. So I've researched about it in depth. So intrasentential code switching is very difficult to do, and we also call it code mixing in World Englishes, and that produces messy data. So in quotation, right, it's on the surface it may feel messy, but it is actually very difficult and should be commendable, right? It is commendable. They analyze these data as examples of super diversity in urban language centers. So here's a quote: super diversity captures the acceleration and intensification of processes of social mixing and fragmentation since the early 1990s as an outcome of two different but related processes. So mixing and fragmentation. Mixing is when they come together. Fragmentation is when the things are not together. A new post-Cold War migration flows and the advent and spread of the internet and mobile technologies. The confluence of these forces have created entirely new sociolinguistic environments, leading to research in the past decade that has brought a mixture of new empirical terrain, extreme diversity in language and literary resources, complex repertoires and practices of participants in interaction, and conceptual challenges. So we've already touched on this, that the mainstreaming of the internet, it has created a lot more hybrid linguistic use than before, right? There are emojis, there are a lot of innovations. People speak more innovatively than before. They text more innovatively. They mix and match. For example, I text in Bangladesh normally, so I guess a lot of people also do that. So the hybridity aspect of language has increased. So that's the main thing. The fact that multilinguals use multiple resources to create dynamic modes of communication is not new. So it's not actually new. It's not actually that it happened after the internet became mainstream. It happened before that as well. There is no question that the spread of the internet and mobile technologies pose new challenges to sociolinguistic paradigms. Obviously, that brought up a lot more changes, and accelerated the hybridity, but it was always there. The forging or the creation of new virtual interactional communities spanning continents transcends, like goes above, rises, goes above and beyond, transcends the requirement of a static local, marking a traditional sociolinguistic speech community. Alright, so here now when we say speech community, let's highlight this. So normally speech communities refer to a an area where people who speak the same language live. So it could be just a small area, or it could be a big area like a city or a town, or just a small group of people living together. For example, there are Bangla speaking communities in Australia, in Canada, in New York. So those people tend to live together in the same block or in the same blocks. So identity is there, but this was the traditional sociolinguistic definition. But now, with the whole world being a small village, because of the internet, because of technology, even with the advent of the email, and now we have video calls, so the distance, the geographical distance doesn't matter that much anymore, right? So that also needs to be questioned. That research about that also needs to happen, about the hybridity and the transcending of space and time, right? Because space doesn't matter that much anymore, and also time. You do not actually need to travel and spend much time to check up on someone, right? But at least some aspects of this super diversity, mixing and fragmentation, are not entirely new and have been discussed extensively in the world English's related literature. So yeah, it was already mentioned that it was not new, but it was the internet sped things up a lot, accelerated. So before there was also things like that, and many researchers also studied them. For example, the challenges posed by the messy data of language mixing to linguistic theories is still an intractable problem. So about the code mixing part, and there are others, communication, there's computer mediated information communication, CMC, computer mediated communication. So these data, to use these data as research findings and research data to analyze them, they are very messy because a lot of abbreviations are used, emojis are used, pictures, videos, stickers, GIFs, right? GIF, GIFs are used, so they are very messy to analyze. This was discussed in the 1970s and 80s by Kachru associates, Kachru, Sridhar, as well as Shana Poplak, Kamwan Gamalu, and others. Code mixing's challenges to psycholinguistic notions of separate storage and processing in bilinguals were explored in Sridhar. So it's a specific topic, you can check this out, and have been taken up in subsequent experimental literature. The claim that there has been an acceleration of intensification of processes of social mixing and fragmentation since the early 1990s is certainly true of Europe in the post-1990s era. But extreme diversity and mixing have been the bread and butter of sociolinguistics in the so-called Third World from time immemorial. So in Europe, this mixing and fragmentation, this happened more after 1990s, but in the Third World, so the so-called Third World, like us, India, Bangladesh, so India is not Third World maybe, so Bangladesh and other countries that are not so much developed, but we had this hybridity to us in us from time immemorial. That means from long ago, like from the start even. The fact that mixing is not a particularly urban or recent phenomenon is seen in the classic study of multilingual convergence in progress by Gumbers and Blom in their study of a village on the Indo-Aryan Dravidian border in India. Classic treatments of this type of mixing include studies of Buddhist hybrid Sanskrit at the start of the Common Era. I like this example, I'll be highlighting it. the Mani Provolum mixed style in Dravidian languages such as Malayalam and Kannada of the last millennium. So millennium is 1000 years. So hybridity in languages was going on. It can be dated back so much long ago. And more modern studies of code mixing in India and Africa and elsewhere. Whether the mixings we see in the present time are different in kind functionally and formally from the earlier ones needs to be studied. So here is a research gap, or Sridhar and Sridhar are pointing out that this could be a future research topic. This should be studied. This seems to be yet another case where a more careful and inclusive consideration of the sociolinguistic processes and theoretical models of research developed to account for them outside of the Euro-American context could enrich our understanding of these dynamic sociolinguistic processes. So it's a big sentence, but it really means that more quote-unquote third world context research should be undergone, because there is already a lot of Euro-American context research, and more research should be done in our countries and in other third world countries. Okay, so let's make a note here. More research is encouraged to be done in quote-unquote third world countries. All right. We make these observations not only to set the historical record straight, but more importantly to show that research in the WE, or World English Paradigm, has been both cutting edge, means very new, and prescient, means it foreshadowed, or it was very ahead of its time, in anticipating a number of developments in sociolinguistics, psycholinguistics, multilingualism. Again, Sridhar and Sridhar are talking about how World English's paradigm, with the field of World Englishes, was so revolutionary, that are only now becoming mainstream. So they're only now becoming accepted by most people. It is interesting to speculate where the state of these fields would have been had they been open to not only the data but also the theoretical innovations that were put forward in the so-called third world context. So Sridhar and Sridhar are saying that if more research had been done on the third world context beforehand, then we could have advanced much further than this.